Okay, well, it's 1 o'clock, and this is the first of, here's Lorraine. Yeah, I am having a little bit of time to work until we have faces, and this is a good motivator as well. So thanks, Lorraine. There's Mary Scott. Hey. And Heidi Stevens. Hey, dear friend. So sorry we weren't able to get together again. Let's do something in the fall, yeah? If you're wondering, I've got my hot cinnamon spice from Harney and Sons, the K-Cup pods. Those are ridiculous. If it were a little later in the day, I would pull out my Pints with Jack. Hey, Trisha Powell. And there's Joe Werner. I've got Pints with Jack pint glasses and whiskey glasses, but it may be a little bit too early in the day to do this. If you're not familiar with Pints with Jack, and I'll of course mention that a little bit later, David Bates and Matt Bush have a podcast called Pints with Jack. Oh, I'm glad, Tricia, that it's your daughter's favorite. There's Amy, and Wanda's here. Hey, Wanda. I was just talking about the Pints with Jack podcast, which is marvelous. Sorry, open a window. Every season, they take one book by C.S. Lewis and they talk about it. I'm reading a couple of chapters a week. And this season, they're doing Till We Have Faces. I've been honored to guest on that. Last season, they did a wonderful job with Great Divorce. Oh, good, Tricia. Yeah, I think they've got next season picked out, and so stay tuned. But Pints with Jack, if you're a podcast sort of person. Well, I wanted to, Tanner Meyer, hey buddy. It's former students popping in, people from all around the world. So that's great. I wanted to start, actually, let me just open up another window. It's not Billy Collins with his moving shovel. But I'm here on the campus of Virginia Theological Seminary, where I'm a first-year seminarian. Thanks to all of you for coming. This is the most dressed up I've gotten in weeks. Virginia Theological Seminary is an Episcopal seminary in Alexandria, Virginia. Walter Hooper, who was C.S. Lewis's secretary in the last year of his life, actually went here. There's Luke Dye, and hey, Mary Mueller. Wonderful to see you all. So, what I thought I'd do today, I know that it's scheduled for an hour. We're going to see how that goes. Live from the kitchen. Wanda knows that kitchen. We'll see how this goes. We'll read either a chapter, maybe two, depending on what your appetite is. I don't want to take up too much of your time, especially on Holy Saturday. Hey, Shirley Craig. Great to see you too, Luke. But I've been watching Will Voss wonderfully reading from his first editions of the Chronicles of Narnia. And of course, inspired by so many others. Billy Collins, as I've mentioned, Sean Colvin, Yo-Yo Ma, Mary Chapin Carpenter, Paul Simon. People are just putting out wonderful, wonderful art. And I wanted to do my part as well. So I'm not quite leaning out my window, but the window's right in front of me. So that's the plan. The schedule will be to read through a chapter of Till We Have Faces. And I'm going to read straight through, then maybe make a couple of comments, and certainly open it wide open for questions. If you have questions about that chapter, we'll take those. I've got my trusty pad right here. And have my bust, Larry Bechtel. Hey, Kathy Dockstader. Oh, you're out on your hike with the kiddo. Larry Bechtel, his father was a Wheaton College professor, and he made the bust of Lewis that's at the Wade Center in Wheaton College. And with a little bit of the money that my father left me, I had that bust made. So, great. Hey, Mary Scott, great to see you out on your hike. Hey to Luke and your baby girl. So, I sent out a little poll, partly to just drum up business, to ask which version of Till We Have Faces I should read. I was given this beautiful British first edition of Till We Have Faces by Stephen Beebe. Hey Gina, how are you? Good to see you. Chris has sent me his thing, and I'm looking forward to hearing from the rest of you. So British first edition of Till We Have Faces. There's Auntie Daryl. Hey Auntie. Us here with Uncle Clive. This is the beautiful American first edition of Till We Have Faces, with that impish look and that cloud of pipe smoke exploding out of Lewis's pipe, and you can see the creation painting in the background. This was a really special gift. Many of you may know the work of Over the Rhine, and I got to spend some time with them years ago, doing a little bit of work. And Linford Detweiler from Over the Rhine, whose first album was actually called Till We Have Faces, they gave me that after doing some work with them. I have endeavored to gather every single paperback copy that I could find. So this is an English one by Fount. Here's another British one for the centenary of Lewis's birth in 1998. Let's see. This is kind of a book club edition of the first edition, so not as valuable, but still some value to that. This is the Time magazine. They also, hey Rebecca, Time magazine did this. They also did a Screw Tape Letters cover, so that's that. Let's see. Oh, here's a kind of a Erdman's version. So here are kind of the paperbacks that have come out. They have different color covers, but the page numbers are just about the same. In fact, I think the page numbers agree with the page number in the American first edition. So there are those. Here's the latest kind of pretty new Till We Have Faces. And so we'll put Jack right up here. How about that? Does he look a little too precarious? Maybe take a couple of those down. So there we are. Here's the one I'll read from. This is my big tatty old one with all of my notes in it. I got notes on every page and a big index in the back, if you can see. There's Egypt. Hey, friend. Oh. Yeah, there we go. So the votes were overwhelmingly, there were about 70 or 80 votes, and they were overwhelmingly for that one. My beautiful wife took one of the copies, and she actually had it bound like this so that it can lie open. Oh yeah, the number of books, but you know, you've been in our house. That's that same number of books. We probably moved 150 boxes of books when we moved here. In addition to all of these lovely additions, put those up. There we go. I also have the studies that have been done. So there's Peter Skockel's. Yeah, I've got everybody's version. Peter Skockel's Study, Reason, and Imagination in C.S. Lewis, a study of Till We Have Faces. Doris Myers did a wonderful book-length study, Bareface, A Guide to Lewis's Last Novel. And I'm currently working on a book that will kind of take these into account and solve some of the mysteries. It's been fun to work with Christine Norval, who has done this reading companion to Till We Have Faces, and she's just released her next version of that. And then I brought the Four Loves for reasons that will become apparent. So the one that I'll be reading from, that's this one, Mary. So unless you all have any questions, unless there are any issues, I'm going to just go ahead and start. If you have your copy of Till We Have Faces, go ahead and pull it out. And like I said, most of the page numbers are exactly the same. And so I'll be starting on Till We Have Faces and looking forward to hearing what you have to say as well. So here we go. You ready for chapter 1? Oh, there's Katie. Love the cover on the British first edition. Yeah, absolutely. There's that one. So, and by the way, I've been kind of shopping on eBay and stockpiling some Lewis first editions, and so I'll be posting those soon. I've got a bunch of first editions that I'll be selling on eBay. But this isn't an ad. So let's dive in, shall we? Till We Have Faces, a myth retold. by C.S. Lewis. And there's the epigram at the beginning that says, "Love is too young to know what conscience is." And this is something that I wrote after I started studying it. I've written it on the title page. I said, "After many readings, I find that I can hardly overestimate the glittering brilliance in these pages. Read with great care, this book will reward you with deadly beauties that can undo your heart to the very saving of your soul." This was C.S. Lewis's last novel, and he called it far and away my best book, and we're going to do a little bit of exploring as to why he might have said that. So I'll put that over here so people can see. Yeah, or not. To Joy Davidman. Part 1. Chapter 1. Kemper Crab. Hey friend, great to see you. Blessings on you. So here we are at Chapter 1. I am old now, and have not much to fear from the anger of gods. I have no husband, nor child, nor hardly a friend through whom they can hurt me. My body, this lean carrion, that still has to be washed and fed and have clothes hung about it daily with so many changes, they may kill as soon as they please. The succession is provided for. My crown passes to my nephew. Being for all these reasons free from fear, I will write in this book what no one who has happiness would dare to write. I will accuse the gods, especially the God who lives on the gray mountain. That is, I will tell all he has done to me from the very beginning, as if I were making my complaint of him before a judge. But there is no judge between gods and men, and the God of the mountain will not answer me. Terrors and plagues are not an answer. And I'll just encourage you as you follow along. Hey, Alex. Hey, Rose. As you follow along, you may want to grab a piece of paper and a pen and just jot down any questions or notes that you might have. Every time I read this book, I find that there's more stuff. I write in Greek as my old master taught it to me. It may someday happen that a traveler from the Greek lands will again lodge in this palace and read the book. Then he will talk of it among the Greeks, where there is great freedom of speech, even about the gods themselves. Perhaps their wise men will know whether my complaint is right, or whether the god could have defended himself if he had made an answer. I was Orwal, and there's some confusion about the pronunciation of that name. I've heard it pronounced Orul or Orual. I'm just going to go ahead and pronounce it Orwal. I was Orwal, the eldest daughter of Trom, king of Glome. The city of Glome stands on the left hand of the river Shennet to a traveler who is coming up from the southeast, not more than a day's journey above Ringall, which is the last town southward that belongs to the land of Glome. The city is built about as far back from the river as a woman can walk in the third of an hour, for the Shennet overflows her banks in the spring. In summer, there was then dry mud on each side of it, and reeds, and plenty of waterfowl. About as far beyond the ford of the Shennet as our city is on this side of it, you come to the holy house of Unget. And beyond the house of Unget, going all the time east and north, you come quickly to the foothills of the great mountain, of the gray mountain. The god of the gray mountain, who hates me, is the son of Unget. He does not, however, live in the house of Unget, but Unget sits there alone. In the furthest recesses of her house, where she sits, it is so dark that you cannot see her well, but in summer enough light may come down from the smoke holes in the roof to show her a little. She is a black stone, without head or hands or face, and a very strong goddess. My old master, whom we called the fox, said she was the same whom the Greeks call Aphrodite, but I write all the names of people and places in our own language. I will begin my writing with the day my mother died, and they cut off her hair, as the custom is. The fox, but he was not with us then, said it is a custom we learned from the Greeks. Let's make sure the volume is up. Sorry, there we go. Bata, the nurse, shore me and my sister Redival outside the palace at the foot of the garden which runs steeply up the hill behind. Redival was my sister, 3 years younger than I, and we two were still the only children. While Bata was using the shears, many other of the slave women were standing round, from time to time wailing for the queen's death and beating their breasts, but in between they were eating nuts and joking. As the shears snipped and Redival's curls fell off, the slaves said, "Oh, what a pity! All the gold gone." They had not said anything like that while I was being shorn. But what I remember best is the coolness of my head and the hot sun on the back of my neck when we were building mud houses, Redival and I, all that summer afternoon. Our nurse Bata was a big-boned, fair-haired, hard-handed woman whom my father had bought from traders who got her further north. When we plagued her, she would say, "Only wait till your father brings home a new queen to be your stepmother. It'll be change times for you then. You'll have hard cheese instead of honey cakes then, and skim milk instead of red wine. Wait and see." Hey, Corey, good to see you. We're at the bottom of page 5, for those who are keeping track. As things fell out, we got something else before we got a stepmother. There was a bitter frost that day. Redival and I were booted. We mostly went barefoot or sandaled, and trying to slide in the yard, which is at the back of the oldest part of the palace, where the walls are wooden. There was ice enough all the way from the byre door to the big dunghill, what with frozen spills of milk and puddles and the stale of the beasts, but too rough for sliding. And out comes Bata, with cold reddening her nose, calling out, "Quick, quick! Ah, you filthies! Come and be cleaned, and then to the king. You'll see what's waiting for you there. My word, this'll be a change for you." "Is it the stepmother?" said Redival. "Oh, worse than that, you'll see," said Bata, polishing Redival's face with the end of her apron. "Lots of whippings for the pair of you, lots of ear-pullings, lots of hard work." Then we were led off and over to the new parts of the palace, where it is built of painted brick, and there were guards in their armor, and skins and heads of animals hung up on the walls. In the pillar room, our father was standing by the hearth, and opposite him there were 3 men in traveling dress whom we knew well enough, traders who came to Glome 3 times a year. "Hey, Gina, hey, Brett." They were just packing up their scales, so we knew they had been paid for something, and one was putting up a fetter, so we knew they must have sold our father a slave. There was a short, thick-set man standing before them, and we knew this must be the man they had sold, for you could still see the sore places on his legs where the irons had been. But he did not look like any other slave we had ever known. He was very bright-eyed, and whatever of his hair and beard was not gray was reddish. "Now, Greekling," said my father to this man, "I trust to beget a prince one of these days, and I have a mind to see him brought up in all the wisdom of your people. Meanwhile, practice on them." He pointed at us children. "If a man can teach a girl, he can teach anything." Then, Just before he sent us away, he said, "Especially the elder. See if you can make her wise. It's about all she'll ever be good for." I didn't understand that, but I knew it was like things I had heard people say of me ever since I could remember. I loved the fox, as my father called him, better than anyone I had yet known. I would have thought that a man who had been free in the Greek lands and then been taken in war and sold far away among the barbarians would be downcast. And so he was sometimes, possibly more often than I, in my childishness, guessed. But I never heard him complain, and I never heard him boast, as all the other foreign slaves did, about the great man he had been in his own country. He had all sorts of sayings to cheer himself up with. No man can be an exile if he remembers that all the world is one city, and everything is as good or bad as our opinion makes it. But I really think what kept him cheerful was his inquisitiveness. Hey, Patty, great to see you. I never knew such a man for questions. He wanted to know everything about our country, and language, and ancestors, and gods, and even our plants and flowers. Hey, Diane, great to see you. That was how I came to tell him all about Unget, about the girls who are kept in her house, and the presents that brides have to make to her, and how we sometimes, in a bad year, have to cut someone's throat and pour the blood over her. For those of you who are wanting to follow along, we're just finishing up page 7. He shuddered when I said that, and muttered something under his breath. But a moment later he said, "Yes, she is undoubtedly Aphrodite, though more like the Babylonian than the Greek. But come, I'll tell you a tale of our Aphrodite." Then he deepened and lilted his voice, and told how their Aphrodite once fell in love with the prince Anchises, while he kept his father's sheep on the slopes of a mountain called Ida. And as she came down the grassy slopes towards his shepherd's hut, lions and lynxes and bears and all sorts of beasts came about her, fawning like dogs, and all went from her again in pairs to the delights of love. But she dimmed her glory and made herself like a mortal woman, and came to Anchises and beguiled him, and they went up together into his bed. I think the fox had meant to end there, but the song now had him in its grip, and he went on to tell what followed, how Anchises woke from sleep and saw Aphrodite standing in the door of the hut, not now like a mortal, but with the glory. So he knew he had lain with a goddess, and he covered his eyes and shrieked, "Kill me at once." Not that this ever really happened, the fox said in haste. It's only lies of poets, child. Not in accordance with nature. But he had said enough to let me see that if the goddess was more beautiful in Greece than in Glome, she was equally terrible in each. Hey, Jen. It was always like that with the fox. He was ashamed of loving poetry. All folly, child. And I had to work much at my reading and writing and what he called philosophy in order to get a poem out of him. But thus, little by little, he taught me many. Virtue, sought by man with travail and toil, was the one he praised most. But I was never deceived by that. The real lilt came into his voice, and the real brightness into his eyes, when we were off into "Take Me to the Apple-Laden Land," or "The moon's gone down, but alone I lie." He always sang that one very tenderly, and as if he pitied me for something. He liked me better than Redival, who hated study and mocked and plagued him and set the other slaves on to play tricks on him. We worked most often in summer on the little grass plot behind the pear trees, and it was there one day that the king found us. We all stood up, of course, 2 children and a slave, with our eyes to the ground and our hands crossed on our breasts. The king smacked the fox heartily on the back and said, "Courage, fox! There'll be a prince for you to work on yet, please the gods. And thank them, too, fox, for it can't have fallen to the lot of a mere Greekling to rule the grandson of so great a king as my father-in-law that is to be. Not that you'll know or care more about it than an ass. You're all peddlers and hucksters down in the Greek lands, eh?" "Are not all men of one blood, master?" said the fox. "Of one blood?" said the king, with a stare and a great bull laugh. "I'd be sorry to think so." Thus, in the end, it was the king himself, and not Bata, who first told us that the stepmother was really at hand. My father had made a great match. He was to have the 3rd daughter of the king of Kafad, who is the biggest king in all our part of the world. I know now why Kafad wanted an alliance with so poor a kingdom as we are, and I have wondered how my father did not see that his father-in-law must already be a sinking man. Hey, Annie? The marriage itself was a proof of it. It cannot have been many weeks before the marriage took place, but in my memory the preparations seem to have lasted for almost a year. All the brickwork round the great gate was painted scarlet, and there were new hangings for the pillar room, and a great new royal bed which cost the king far more than he was wise to give. It was made of an eastern wood, which was said to have such virtue that 4 of every 5 children begotten in such a bed would be male. "All folly, child," said the fox. "These things come about by natural causes." And as the day drew nearer, there was nothing but driving in of beasts and slaughtering of beasts. The whole courtyard reeked with the skins of them, and baking and brewing. But we children had not much time to wander from room to room and stare and hinder, for the king suddenly took it into his head that Redaval and I and 12 other girls, daughters of nobles, were to sing the bridal hymn. Hey, Sheila. And nothing would do him but a Greek hymn, which was a thing no other neighboring king could have provided. "But master," said the fox, almost with tears in his eyes. "Teach 'em, fox, teach 'em," roared my father. "What's the use of spending good food and drink on your Greek belly if I'm not to get a Greek song out of you on my wedding night? What's that? No one's asking you to teach them Greek. Of course they won't understand what they're singing, but they can make the noises. See to it, or your back'll be redder than your beard ever was." For those of you just joining, we're on the top of page 11. It was a crazy scheme, and the fox said afterwards that the teaching of that hymn to us barbarians was what grayed the last red hair. "I was a fox," he said. "Now I am a badger." When we had made some progress in our task, the king brought the priest of Ungat in to hear us. I had a fear of that priest, which was quite different from my fear of my father. I think that what frightened me in those early days was the holiness of the smell that hung about him. The temple smell of blood, mostly pigeon's blood, but he had sacrificed men too, and burnt fat, and singed hair, and wine, and stale incense. Hey, Trevor. It was the Ungat smell. Perhaps I was afraid of his clothes too, all the skins they were made of, and the dried bladders, and the great mask shaped like a bird's head which hung on his chest. It looked as if there were a bird growing out of his body. He did not understand. Sorry, taking a little note. He did not understand a word of the hymn, nor the music either. but he asked, "Are the young women to be veiled or unveiled?" "Need you ask?" said the king, with one of his great laughs, jerking his thumb in my direction. "Do you think I want my queen frightened out of her senses? Veils, of course, and good thick veils, too." One of the other girls tittered, and I think that was the first time I clearly understood that I am ugly. This made me more afraid of the stepmother than ever. I thought she would be crueler to me than to Redival because of my ugliness. It wasn't only what Bada had said that frightened me. I had heard of stepmothers in plenty of stories. And when the night came, and we were all in the pillared porch, nearly dazzled with torches, and trying hard to sing our hymn, as the fox had taught us, and he kept on frowning and smiling and nodding at us while we sang, and once he held up his hands in horror, pictures of things that had been done to girls in the stories were dancing in my mind. Then came the shouts from outside, and more torches, and next moment they were lifting the bride out of her chariot. She was as thickly veiled as we, and all I could see was that she was very small. Hey, Nancy. It was as if they were lifting a child. That didn't ease my fears. The little are the spiteful, our proverb says. Then, still singing, we got her into the bridal chamber and took off her veil. I know now that the face I saw was beautiful. But I did not think of that then. All I saw was that she was frightened, more frightened than I, indeed, terrified. It made me see my father as he must have looked to her a moment since, when she had her first sight of him, standing to greet her in the porch. His was not a brow, a mouth, a girth, a stance, or a voice to quiet a girl's fear. We took off layer after layer of her finery, making her small yet smaller, and left the shivering white body with its staring eyes in the king's bed, and filed out. We had sung very badly. So that's it for chapter 1. So I'm going to give you a moment. If you've got some questions, I'd love to take them. I forgot to light my candle back here, so I'm going to do that. Any of you who know me know that I could talk incessantly for the next 3 hours about this chapter and everything else. Yes, Nancy, I know who you are. So while you're thinking of some questions, I may start with just a little bit of background about Till We Have Faces. Hey, Michael Braidaway. Looks like I've got an audience in Houston. Till We Have Faces was Lewis's last novel. Peter, can you talk about the role Joy played in helping to write this book? Absolutely. It's like I've got shills in the audience. Yeah. So Till We Have Faces, Lewis's last novel. It was composed in the spring of 1955. He called it far and away my best book, but my one great disappointment with the critics. I'm going to jot down these questions as they go by so I don't miss any of them. Lewis had begun corresponding with Joy Davidman in 1949. Patty Callahan is in the audience. She just released the paperback of her novel Becoming Mrs. Lewis, which is one of the best, it's the best portrayal, I think, for my money, of how, sorry, jotting down Mary's questions. One of the best portrayals of how Joy Davidman kind of met and fell in love with C.S. Lewis. The contention that I have made, and you can find this online on the Pints with Jack podcast, on the video that I did for the Wade Center, on the video I did for Imagination Redeemed conference. I think that Joy single-handedly was Lewis's co-author. And your insight shared on Pipe with Jack were so helpful. Okay, great. And Tricia is reading Becoming Mrs. Lewis. Lewis himself said, reportedly, so he doesn't write about this, but reportedly, I spoke with Lyle Dorset when he was the director of the Wade Center, or after he was director of Wade Center, and he said that either Owen Barfield or George Sayer, or maybe both, told him that Lewis considered Joy his co-writer. I spoke with Joy Davidman, with Douglas Gresham. Yeah, I do have links, Amy, but you can just do a little bit of search, Pints with Jack, or if you look up on YouTube, Lazo Wade, that'll give you my Till We Have Faces talk. I spoke with Douglas Gresham in the Kilns on the 50th anniversary of Lewis's death. And Doug told me in the common room of the Kilns, actually in the hallway in between, that there was a double author to that book, and that Joy helped Lewis write more like himself. In her letters, Out of My Bone, and then some subsequent letters that have been discovered, Joy Davidman said in the published letters, published by Don W. King from Montreat University, Out of My Bone, she says, I'm not a tenth of the author that Lewis is, but he says he helps me, but I can help him write more like himself. He says he finds my help indispensable. And Doug told me that what would happen is that Lewis would write a paragraph and then read it to Joy, and she would make some comments, and then he would make some changes. She herself said that one night, Lewis, having lots of time, now that he was at Cambridge, Lewis is dried up and he didn't have an idea for a book. And so they poured a whiskey and another whiskey, and they kicked around some ideas. Lewis had been kicking around the idea for Till We Have Faces, for the retelling of the Cupid and Psyche myth. He'd been kicking that around since he was a teenager, and there were several false starts. And so the idea of doing it, of retelling the Cupid and Psyche myth through the mouth of the ugly older sister, is kind of what came to Lewis when speaking with Joy in the spring of 1955. What I will recommend to those of you who haven't read this bit yet, I don't know about you, but I normally will forego introductions and postscripts and things. But at the back of Till We Have Faces, sorry about the glare, there you are, there's a note in the back of the book. That note is worth reading, and I think worth reading first. It gives you kind of a summary of the Cupid and Psyche story, and then it also it talks about what Lewis had intended with that book. And the central alteration that thrust itself upon Lewis's mind. So, so I think that Joy Davidman, I'm not sure exactly what the timeline was, because in 55 she still lived in London, but she spent a great deal of time with Lewis in Oxford. In fact, he invited her to stay at his house the first week that he met her in 1952. So I'm not sure exactly when she was in Oxford, but it appears that she would hear the manuscript and would coach Lewis up, and there's really, she has a real hand in it. Those of you familiar with the book, the passage where the fox gets too tired and can't listen to Orwell anymore and goes off to sleep, and Orwell comments, that's just like a man. Once he's got a meal or a drink or a woman or a sleep on his mind, you'll get no more good out of him. I think that's Joy Davidman, clearly. So I think you kind of have to see her as his co-author. A couple of people have mentioned that who knew. Lewis wanted to put her name on the book, but she refused and said, no, I just helped him write more like himself. So that's the answer to Joy's role, at least for now, until I get my book out. Mary Mueller asked about the poems. And I don't have those to hand, but I will make a point to have them for you next week. In volume 19 of 7, an Anglo-American literary journal, which is a journal put out by the Wade Center, Doris Myers, who is the author of Bareface, Doris Myers, the author of this study, She has an article called Browsing the Gloam Library, and she looks at the different manuscripts. And so I don't have that information at the tip of my tongue, but I'll look that stuff up for you and have that question for you next week. So, any other thoughts or questions? For those of you who read the book, I'm interested in knowing kind of what your first reaction is. What I find a lot of people saying is that the book really moves them. They find it really, really mythic and deep and profound and touching. And a lot of people consider it not only their favorite book of Lewis's, but their favorite book. But a lot of people have some real confusion about that. And I'm assuming that that's the same for many of you. So not seeing any more questions and having gotten the thumbs up from Mary, I'm going to give you a couple of keys that I use to reading Till We Have Faces and understanding it, if you don't mind. I'm mindful of your time, and it looks like one chapter a week. It sounds good. Seeing you, Sheila, is making my day as well. Couple of keys to reading Till We Have Faces. Knowing that Joy Davidman wrote it with him. Peter says he didn't understand what's going on the first time. I didn't understand what was going on the fourth and fifth time I read it. It has what I call sometimes the C.S. Lewis, or the Till We Have Faces whiplash. You read it, people often save it until last. They've read all the Narnias and the Great Divorces, Screw Tapes, all of that. And then they go, hey, David Beckman, so great to see you. We're done reading our chapter and we're just taking questions now, so feel free to dive in. So people having read, Mere Christianity and also with you, David, peace be with you this Holy Saturday. Having read all of the kind of big stuff, they start rooting around in the corners, and they probably save, Pilgrim's Regress or Allegory of Love or the Oxford History of English Literature. They probably save that stuff for last. And so wanting more fiction from Lewis, people often will turn kind of last to Till We Have Faces and just really be deeply confused. And that's certainly how I was. I remember I had spent some time with Over the Rhine and Linford Detweiler and Rich Hordinsky and Karen Berquist, and had done a little bit of work with them while I was still working with Phil Keggy, who was the first person to introduce me to Lewis. And Linford gave me this beautiful copy of the first edition. And I think it was this book that I read while traveling from LA back to Nashville when I worked with Phil. And I remember being completely confused. I think that but yet Lewis calls it, hey, Joe Rodden, great to see you, old friend. Lewis calls it much my best book and far and away my best book. Those are two of the quotes in his letters. Was he right? Is this Lewis's best book? He didn't say it was his favorite. He said it was his best. Elsewhere, he compares making his books like a cathedral and puts Perelandra and Till We Have Faces at the top. One of the questions that I'd urge you to consider was he right? Was he exaggerating? Was he just flattering himself? And if it was his best book, is another good question is Lewis a good assessor of his own work? I think it was far and away his best book. And so here are a couple of keys. I'm sorry to tease you with these. Read it carefully. Read every word. Read the words carefully. If you read carefully enough, you will find, where is it? In many of the printings of the book, I think it's somewhere in chapter 2. The printers mess up and repeat the word "the." As most of you know, with Lewis, there isn't a comma out of place, so spend your time carefully reading it. Pay attention to the fact that Joy Davidman's voice is deeply present in this book. As many of you know, Don W. King from Montreat College has published Joy Davidman's poems, all of them, including late in her life, 45 love sonnets that she wrote to Lewis and several other poems that she wrote to Lewis. That book is called A Naked Tree, and it's Joy Davidman's complete poems. She writes love poetry to Lewis from 1949 until 1954. She stops writing poems to Lewis in 54, but in the spring of 1955 starts writing Till We Have Faces with him. I've also spent some time with Bishop Simon Barrington Ward, who was the chaplain at Magdalen College, Cambridge, at the end of Lewis's life, in Lewis's career at Cambridge. He was there from 53 until 63, and sat with Lewis at table often. And I said to the bishop, I think that Lewis fell in love with Joy Davidman. Hey, Riz, good to see you. I think Lewis fell in love with Joy Davidman in 1955. He marries her in 1956 to extend his citizenship, but it's not until she has cancer in 1957 and he realizes that he's going to lose her that he realizes that he's fallen in love with her. Hey, Lizzie, good to see you. I think Lewis falls in love with her before he admits to himself that he's in love with her. And I think that he falls in love with her in the spring of 1955. And I've done some archival research, some research in unpublished letters, in oral interviews and transcripts. And I believe that the way that Lewis fell in love with Joy Davidman is around Till We Have Faces. So that's kind of one of the keys to reading it. You can find some other keys on the very first page. Hey, Father Kevin Story, good to see you. God bless you. And pray for me on this Holy Triduum on Holy Saturday. Love and blessings to you, Father Story. The very first page has got some really important stuff. I am old now and have not much to fear from the anger of gods. So she's writing her account about her fear or her lack of fear of the gods, and she's writing her complaint against the gods. And she says that she doesn't have anything to fear from the anger of gods. But the thing is, and as I've been doing an annotation, in fact, you can see right here, I've got the text of Till We Have Faces. Sorry about the glare. There we go. I've got the text of Till We Have Faces, and then I'm doing an annotated version of that book. And so at the bottom of each page, I've got a bunch of footnotes. And I'm hoping to publish, in addition to my study on Till We Have Faces, I'm hoping to publish the annotated Till We Have Faces. I think even the first two words of the book, I am, are really important. And as you read through the book, pay attention to that. Let's see. Yeah, I think she says that she has not much to fear from the anger of gods, but dozens of times throughout the book, she talks about being afraid and terrified. And so I think that one of the real things that really kind of helped me as I was going, I really cracked Till We Have Faces open in 2006 when I was working for the C.S. Lewis Foundation. I was going to Williams College. They had a summer institute. It was the first time I got to meet Malcolm Guite, which was a huge blessing. I met Tom Howard, another huge blessing. Joseph Pierce was there, so many others. And as I'm on the plane, I realized that you can't trust Orwell. Now, I'm a literature major. I did modernist British literature. I know all about unreliable narrators, but I think that there's more to her than her unreliability. I think that it's not just unreliable. I think that she is purposely lying to us. And if you look at the very first page of book 2, she says, if I were to leave my story like it is, I would die perjured. So all of book 1 is perjury. She's not really telling the truth about the gods. And so I think that that's something to be aware of. There's another book that Lewis writes where the narrator, the first person narrator, is lying throughout the course of the book. And of course, that book is Screwtape. And so, as with Screwtape, in order to kind of understand spiritual wisdom, what you have to do is take anything Screwtape says and then flip it right side up, right? He'll say, oh, make sure that your patient doesn't know anything about the connection between the body and prayer. So, Dave, I'm trying to read your post there. Screwtape says, "Oh, make him unaware that the body needs to pray too." Geographical setting of till we have faces. Yeah, I'll answer that one too. So if you think of Orwell as Screwtape, I think that that's kind of a good way. She's desperately unreliable. Hey, head hop. Desperately unreliable, and in fact purposely trying to deceive. And I think the first person she's trying to deceive is perhaps herself. She's also deceiving the God of love. Yeah, that's a first principle. Doris Myers does a good job in her book on Bareface, and she places Till We Have Faces somewhere in Scythia, which is kind of south of Russia, and not too far away from Greek land, so kind of South Asia, so somewhere there, and kind of on the hinterlands. She's, I think, hey Yvonne, good to see you. I think she's purposefully vague, or Lewis is purposely vague. He's intending it to be kind of some barbarian town on the fringes of the empire. By the way, this word barbarian is a really key one. We heard it a couple of times in chapter 1. Barbarian, for those of you who know your Greek, barbarian is what the Greeks. It's a Greek term that comes from hearing anybody speaking anything but Greek. So the Greeks thought that anybody who wasn't speaking Greek was making sounds like bar, 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 bar. So a non-Greek speaker is a barbarian. And another kind of key, and Katie Wyndham and I have talked about this, is remember that this is Lewis in his head writing the book in Greek and then translating it into English. So that's some of it. So Joy Davidman is involved. Lewis is really kind of, Orwell is really deceiving us and deceiving herself. And so there's a deceptive nature to a lot of what's going on. In fact, she lies many times. But if you look in your text, there are lots of parenthetical statements. In fact, parenthetical statements on almost every page. Those parenthetical statements are usually statements of provable fact. And so even though she's consciously lying, subconsciously she's telling the truth, and those true statements, even if they're not very important, those true facts kind of slip out in the parentheses. So that's worth paying attention to. So there's the geographical statement. Another key to reading Till We Have Faces, that's also on the first page. I am old now and have not much to fear from the anger of gods. I have no husband, nor child, nor hardly a friend through whom they can hurt me. I brought this book, The Four Loves. And when I was asked by the Lewis Foundation to teach 2 books for a college course at their Summer Institute in 2006 at Williams College, I immediately said, I want to teach Till We Have Faces and The Four Loves side by side. I knew somehow that those books were connected, but since then I've discovered how deeply intertwined they are. My proposal is that Till We Have Faces, written in 1955, is the novelized version. Hey, Shirley Craig. Yeah, of course he was writing in Greek and then translating it. So I think Till We Have Faces is the novel version of The Four Loves. Remember, Till We Have Faces is written in 1955. In 1958, there is the audio version of The Four Loves, but it's not really the audio version. These are talks that Lewis gave on The Four Loves. It's the only thing that comes out as an audiobook, so you can hear him actually, reading The Four Loves. But it's an early draft of what becomes The Four Loves. Lewis changes that draft, adds to it, subtracts from it, and then The Four Loves comes out. The Four Loves, the copyright to The Four Loves, is actually held by Helen Joy Lewis. So one of my arguments is that Helen Joy Lewis, Joy Davidman, was the author of The Four Loves in Till We Have Faces and in Lewis's life. So think about The Four Loves. Now, if you haven't read that book, there are 4 Greek words for love. There's storge, which means family love, patriot love, love of country, love of organization, love of family, the same love. There's philia, which is friendship. Annie Nardone, Recommended reading the Four Loves as a comparison volume? Yeah, absolutely. Read it before Till We Have Faces? No, read it afterwards, or read it before, but then know that the two are connected. And then Tricia says that she's never heard it, so let me pull that up really quickly. This is super low tech, but whatever. Here we go. Here we are.
In Greek, there are 4 words for love. Storge, S-T-O-R-G-E, means affection, the sort of love there ought to be between near relations. Philia, P-H-I-L-I-A, means friendship. Eros,
So there you go. That's the Four Loves. You can download that today. It's on iTunes. It's everywhere else. It's on Audible. Yeah. So I think that the Four Loves are the embedded structure of Till We Have Faces. Yeah. So the book on audio are the original lectures, Tricia. If you have the audio, you have the original. And Becca Choate, booksbybecca.com, has actually done a transcription of the Four Loves. Look at this. I have no husband, nor child, nor hardly a friend through whom the gods can hurt me. The Four Loves are Storge, family love, Eros, romantic love, Philia, friendship love, and Agape, or as Lewis calls it, Agape, the divine love, unconditional love. I have no husband, Eros, nor child, Storge, nor hardly a friend, Philia, through whom the gods can hurt me. Now she's lying about the gods, and if she's saying that the gods are hurting her, but she's actually lying, what are the gods actually doing? The gods are loving her. Okay? And so I think yeah, Lizzie, I think that that's the only way to think about Till We Have Faces. And in fact, at the end of the Four Loves, and maybe we'll end right here, and maybe somebody next week will remind me to read Surprised by Joy and talk about how this is an autobiography, but we need to wrap up here. This is the end of the Four Loves. And I think that everything Lewis wrote about and thought about and really wanted to communicate, I think everything is about love. I think that's the central theme in Lewis's life. I absolutely do not think that joy is the central theme. I think that joy only points to love. But here, let's close with this. This is the end of the Four Loves, and see if that maybe doesn't help you go back and reread Till We Have Faces. And we'll read chapter 2 next week, and feel free to spread the word. And with this, where a better book would begin, mine must end. I dare not proceed. God knows, not I, whether I have ever tasted this love, agape love, divine love. Perhaps I have only imagined the tasting. Perhaps, for many of us, all experience merely defines, so to speak, the shape of that gap where our love of God ought to be. It is not enough. It is something. If we cannot practice the presence of God, it is something to practice the absence of God, to become increasingly aware of our own unawareness till we feel like men who should stand beside a great cataract and hear no noise, or like a man in a story who looks in a mirror and finds no face there. Or a man in a dream who stretches out his hand to invisible objects and gets no sensation of touch. To know that one is dreaming is to be no longer perfectly asleep. But for news of the fully waking world, you must go to my veterans. So, that's, I think, where we'll end. It's right about 2 o'clock. Thank you so much for joining us. We'll see you next week, and I'll post this video. I would love to have you back next week, and look forward to a good Easter. I know it's a strange time. I get tired of saying it. I don't even know what the cliches are anymore. But I do know that there is this great love, And that Good Holy Saturday is a time to practice the absence of God. It was the only time that God was dead. But we know that Saturday isn't the end of the story, that story is coming on Easter. So many blessings to you all. Peace of the Lord be always with you, and we'll see you next week. Oh, thank you, Diana. Great to see you. Bye-bye. And I'll post this if you want it.